When you're doing these little quick, rough, silhouette-shaped drawings, it's important to know exactly what it is that will make a good and interesting looking shape. It's not enough to just rely on your intuition unless you have acquired the knowledge of what it is that makes interesting shapes. And then that intuition can be depended upon. But if you just rely on intuition without first acquiring this knowledge, then that intuition is not reliable. So therefore, you need to know what the rules are for making interesting shapes. And this is the kind of information that is very difficult to find. I'm going to delete these shapes and then start drawing a shape. And I'm using this horizontal brush that you can see here. And it's at a slight angle. So now what am I doing here exactly that's making this shape interesting? And then a few of these smaller shapes like this sticking up out of the big main shape. And then with white, I'll add, let's say, a spot right there and then a smaller one right there like that. And a little more work needs to be done like this and like this. Okay, now, the rules for good shapes. Irregular. What that means is that the shape needs to be irregular. And you can see that this is an irregular shape. Drawing this red line at the contour around like that. See how irregular that shape is all the way around? And the negative space, which is this, is cutting into this black shape, which is the positive shape. And here you can see the negative shape cutting into that positive shape like that. And thereby, the positive shape and the negative shape, they interlock. That's how you get them to interlock, by having the negative shape cut into the positive shape and the positive shape, which is this, cut into the negative shape. And this interlocking holds them together, like the pieces of a puzzle that you interlock. They hold together because you interlock them. Here's the second rule that I just mentioned, interlocking negative and positive shapes. I've added the third rule that you see here, passive and active sides. That means that one side, such as this side here, for example, is the passive side. And it's passive because this side of the shape isn't as irregular as this side is. There's more irregularity here. And because of that, this side is the more active side. See, when you compare the two sides, this one doesn't look as active as that one does. There's less irregularity here. I think I'm going to bring this part in a little bit more by erasing some of it like that. And I'll explain why I did that later. Now, rule number 4 that I'm going to mention, which is adding obliques. So here you see obliques, rule number 4, and the entire shape is oblique, which makes it more dynamic. At the edge of a shape, there should be at least one edge, if not more, that has an oblique. And you see an oblique right there. Or in other words, an oblique is referred to as a diagonal. And these obliques within the shape help to make the shape more dynamic, look more lively. And I could add some more obliques, for example, right there, and a smaller oblique over here. You see right there? You can see an oblique right there. Here. Here. Here's a small one. Here's another oblique. Another one. And another one. Here's another one. They're all over the place. This is oblique. And they're going in different directions, as you can see. So add different sized obliques. This is a large one. This is even larger. These are smaller. Here's an oblique, as I mentioned. And they're going in different directions. This adds variety, and variety adds interest to a shape when you have these different directions of obliques and different sizes of these obliques. Here's a long one right there. So these obliques are diagonals or slanting lines at the edge of a shape. As you can see, I had to reduce this because there are additional rules that I want to add here. And the next one that I'm going to add is gradation of size. So looking at this shape here, you can see that the height of this shape right there is taller than this part of the shape, which is like that. The size gets gradually smaller as it moves toward the front of the shape. Therefore, there's a gradation of size that is taking place. Shapes getting gradually smaller. The principle of design called gradation has been introduced, and gradation makes the shape more interesting because of the variety that gradation adds. The variety consists of larger shapes here, and then middle-sized shapes here, and then smaller shapes here. So there's this variety of sizes of shapes through gradation that adds interest to a shape. Number 6 is the rule 2 different dimensions. And what that means is that the shape needs to be longer than it is high, or higher than it is long, thereby arriving at 2 different dimensions, and these 2 different dimensions result in variety because you don't have the same length. There are 2 different lengths, therefore there is variety. And variety adds interest to a shape. The most uninteresting shapes are the ones that look square, like this. And that's because they have the same dimension, height and width. There's no variety in the sizes of the dimensions. Rule number 7, incidence at the edges. And what that means is, you see these little shapes sticking out of the big shape here and here and here and here and even here and this and this. They're sticking out of the big shape. And those are referred to as incidents. Incidents along the edge of a shape. And they push into or cut into the negative shape or space that you see here and help to interlock the positive shape with the negative shape. Therefore, uniting those 2 shapes, holding them together, so to speak, like the pieces of a puzzle that I mentioned. Rule number 8 is contrast of measure, and that refers to contrast of sizes. So, for example, here is a shape of a certain size, and then when I add a smaller shape like that, that smaller shape contrasts sharply with the larger one. Contrast of size. Also, this larger shape has a wider measure than this small shape here, which has a very narrow measure. So there is this contrast of the width of these 2 shapes. Whatever different degrees of contrast there are refers to contrast of measure. So you can have contrast that is less, something like this, or you can have contrast that is more extreme, like in this case. Here the 2 shapes are similar, but here they contrast sharply with each other. Contrast of measure is found throughout this shape. For example, this size here is larger than this size, and that size is larger than that size. Then you see this size is larger than this one. Then you have these little incidents sticking out of the shape, which have different sizes. That one is larger in size than that one. And this whole part of the shape is larger in size than that one, and larger than that one. So there are these different sizes for these different parts of the shape. The contours or edges of the shape also have different lengths. This contour here is longer than this contour, and then you have the smaller contours down here, and this contour is longer than these contours or edges. Then you have a short edge here, a longer one here, an even longer one here. So there is this variety of sizes of edges and different sizes of these different parts that are sticking out of the shape, the incidents that are pushing out of the shape and into the negative space. Moving on now to rule number 9, which is asymmetrical. The shape should be asymmetrical rather than symmetrical. Symmetrical shapes are boring compared to asymmetrical shapes. Asymmetrical shapes have greater variety, and therefore they are not boring. This is an asymmetrical shape. The way you tell is by drawing a line down the center of the shape and checking to see if the left side is different from the right side. In this case, it is. And therefore, this is an asymmetrical shape. These are the kind of shapes you need to avoid. They are the geometric shapes. This is a symmetrical shape, while this is an asymmetrical shape. Here's another kind of shape that you should avoid because it's a boring symmetrical shape, the circle, as well as this geometric shape, the triangle. These are all symmetrical shapes that are the same on the left as they are on the right. So therefore, if you want interesting shapes, avoid these kind of geometric shapes and go for these kind of asymmetrical shapes that are irregular. And now for rule number 10, which is focal point. And that's why I added these white shapes here. The eye goes to those white shapes because that is the focal point. So it's a place where the eye can rest for a moment before it moves on to explore the rest of the shape. Another thing you should watch out for when designing a shape is that not only should the left and the right side of the shape be different, but also if you have a vertical shape, such as this, for example, the bottom should look different than the top does. That is, the bottom should be wider and the top more narrow. Or it could be, let's say, a shape like this. It's more curved. You see, the bottom is wider, the top is more narrow. The left side is different than the right side. If I draw a vertical line down the center, you can see that this is an asymmetrical shape that is not only different, as I said, on the left and the right, but also at the top and the bottom. And this creates the most interesting kind of shapes when you have this kind of variety. I realize that there are a lot of rules here to remember and apply to shapes, but if you do a lot of practice work and you consciously try to apply these rules here, maybe 1 or 2 or 3 at a time, to your practice work, with a lot of practice, eventually you won't have to do much thinking about applying these rules. They'll enter into the shapes that you design almost automatically, with just a minimal amount of trying to remember some of these rules, because they will have become part of your memory. So you can rely on your intuition to tell you if the shape that you have just created is a good shape or a bad shape. Because that intuition is based on you having learned these rules for good shapes. So creating good shapes becomes almost second nature. So you can quickly draw a shape like this, and then evaluate that shape and see if it has these rules here that I've pointed out to you. And if it does, then you might want to develop that shape further. And if it doesn't look like it has many of these or all of these rules, then you can rest assured that the shape isn't a very interesting shape. And therefore, if you use that kind of shape, you're going to end up with a very uninteresting looking drawing or painting. Now this shape here, it could become just about anything that you imagine that it could be. So looking at this shape, it reminds me of a spacecraft. So I could further develop this shape by adding the internal shapes, breaking up that silhouette shape with smaller shapes, and then just seeing what that looks like and deciding whether I want to develop this into a painting of a spacecraft. Doesn't have to be a spaceship. This could maybe be a city, a futuristic city. So I'm thinking of buildings. These various shapes could be futuristic looking buildings. Now this is very rough, as you can see, but it shows you that once you have an interesting shape, you can build on that shape. And you can build whatever your imagination says that that shape could be turned into. This shape, what does that suggest to you when looking at it? To me, it suggests that it could be turned into a gun of some sort, a futuristic gun. So you begin to break up the silhouette shape into smaller shapes, and you don't necessarily use the shape exactly the way it is. You're going to have to make changes. So for example, this shape here that's sticking out like that, I'm going to remove. And then I'm going to add other shapes to this shape. You, in other words, develop the shape that's there. Improve upon it. Make it even better. And then turn the shape into a shape that resembles the subject that you have in mind. So therefore, I'm making these changes so that this will look more like some kind of futuristic gun. Adding a focal point right there, these lights. So already it's beginning to look more like some kind of futuristic gun. Add a trigger over here. You see, and it didn't take much to modify that shape so that it resembles some kind of futuristic gun. Before I move on to the next segment of this video, there's another rule, which is one of the most important rules for good shapes, that I'm going to add to this list. And that other rule is shape unity. And I'm going to be talking about that in greater detail in the next segment of this video. But before I go on to the next segment, I just want to introduce you to that idea for these kind of black silhouette shapes. Shape unity is achieved by giving the shape the appearance of it being made up mostly of one kind of shape, either the triangle, the circle, or the square. This doesn't necessarily mean that the shape you design has to look exactly like a triangle, but it should have the character of a triangle. That is, it should look angular, like this, you see. Or it could look more like a triangle, as long as it gives that appearance of an angular looking shape. So this shape, for example, needs a bit of modification so that there is more of this kind of angular or triangular shape apparent within this shape. If you make up a shape like this with too many different shapes that are all taking up about the same amount of area, then you end up with a shape that doesn't have any dominance of shape. And dominance of shape is what creates unity of shape. So therefore, in an example like you see here, I need to make a few modifications so that this shape looks more like it is made up mostly of these angular or triangular shapes. In other words, it has that angular character to it. I changed some of the shapes on this gun so that they look more like they are triangular or angular shapes, so that there is this unity of triangular shapes. And you can see these triangular or angular shapes everywhere. Here, here, and here, here. And these angular shapes have these angles to them at the contour. See the diagonals or oblique edges that these triangular or angular shapes have, even here at the front. So they're all over the place. And because of that, there is a unity of shapes here. To add more variety to the shapes, contrasting shapes, such as the circle here, can be introduced. So, for example, I could add, let's say, a circular shape over here instead of that angular shape, like that. So now, there is more variety of shapes because I've introduced this circular shape, and then I can repeat that circular shape somewhere so that it's not the only circular shape, and maybe I can add one right here like that. When you do introduce a contrasting shape, such as I did here with the circular shape, it's best to have another similar shape like that repeated somewhere else. And I'll get into the reason why that should be done in the next segment. It's best not to introduce too many different shapes. And you only have three possibilities. You only have angular shapes, circular shapes, and square-like or rectangular shapes. If you add all of these different shapes, then there is more variety of shapes, of course, but there is also the danger then that you lose the unity of shapes because there are too many different shapes, and they may outnumber those shapes that are supposed to dominate. So if you do introduce all three of these shapes, make sure that you only introduce them in small amounts so that you don't lose the dominant shapes. There should be many more of one particular kind of shape than the others, which results in dominance of shapes and in turn results in a unity of shapes, just like you see here. Limiting yourself to only two shapes. Either you use the triangle and the circle, or the circle and the square. Now remember, I'm talking about shapes that have a square-like character to them, not necessarily that you use an actual square shape or an actual circle. And the reason for limiting yourself to two opposing shapes like this, strongly opposing shapes, is that you're able to create more drama this way, because the shapes contrast sharply with each other. That results in more dramatic looking shapes. So if you introduce a third shape, what that does, it then dilutes the drama that is created by the two opposing shapes. It lessens that drama. But when you only have those two opposing shapes, there's nothing there to intervene and lessen the drama of those two shapes, those two strongly opposing shapes. When you look at this example, you can see this kind of repetition of a particular kind of shape, such as the triangular shape. You see that right here and here, here. They're all over the place, except for this shape. This looks more like a rectangular shape. So some changes might have to be done here in order to create a more unified impression of shapes. Remember, you're after the total impression of unity of shapes. So if it doesn't appear like the shapes that you've created have that total impression of unity, then you need to go in there and start making some changes, adding more of one particular kind of shape and less of another kind of shape, so that you end up with dominance of shapes, and in turn that creates unity of shapes, just as I pointed out to you in this example. All shapes can be categorized as belonging to one of these three basic shapes: the circle, triangle, and square. And when the drawing or painting of your subject has an overall appearance of one of these kind of shapes, then your drawing of that subject will have a unity of shapes, which means that the whole drawing holds together. There is a cohesion. Cohesion meaning a sticking together. All of the parts stick together. They hold together. They don't fly apart. If the shapes are different, they fly apart. If they're the same, that is the same character, either they have a circular character, a triangular character, or a rectangular character to them, or a square character, when they have one of these characters of shape to them, the whole drawing holds together. All of the shapes hold together. There is a cohesion of shapes, in other words. Here's how a beginner or an amateur may start a drawing, adding these shapes here. Let's say there's this figure and he's looking down, and I'm just trying to show you how a beginner may do the drawing, not thinking of the shapes really, just trying to capture the subject of this figure with his head down. And so the beginner just tries to copy as faithfully as possible the subject, if the subject is in front of him. And if he isn't, and if the drawing is being done from imagination, well, the beginner will just put down shapes at random without thinking about what kind of shapes he or she is actually putting down. So the result is a hodgepodge of a bunch of different looking shapes. And when you have disparate or a hodgepodge of different shapes within the subject like this, then the shapes don't hold together. There's no unity of shapes. Without unity of shapes, the shapes fall apart, so to speak. They don't hold together. There's no cohesion. But when there is unity of shapes, then there is cohesion. All the shapes are united. They form one unit, one unified unit. And because the shapes are unified, they hold together. So in this example, the beginner doesn't know about the importance of unity of shapes. You see all sorts of different shapes. You see a triangular shape here, which is this basic shape. Then you see a curved shape here, which is this shape. Then you see this rectangular shape here, which is that shape, that basic shape. Then you see curving shapes here, which are a derivative of the basic shape of the circle. Then you see a triangle shape here, and then you see a bunch of more curved shapes over here. So there is this disunity of shapes because too many of the shapes are too different. Then also part of this circular shape has these angles, while this part of the shape has these smooth lines. Then this part of the triangle has these angles. And then there's a smooth line here. So again, there's no unity. You have these angular lines or jagged lines, and then you have the smooth lines on the shapes. Some lines are straight, like these here, while others are more curving, like that. Because there are too many different kinds of lines and shapes, this drawing therefore lacks a unity of shapes. And when there is no unity of shapes, as I mentioned, then the drawing doesn't hold together. While a drawing or painting must have variety in order for it to be interesting, there is such a thing as too much variety. And in this drawing, there is too much variety. And because of that, there is no unity. You can have diversity within unity as long as there is a dominance of one particular line, one particular shape, one particular value, one particular color, for example. But when there are too many differences, then there is no unity. When there is no dominance, in other words, there is no unity. Now, that's another thing that you need to learn about, dominance. Once the drawing becomes unified through the repetition of the same character of shape, then there is dominance of shape. So this drawing could have a dominance, let's say, of triangular shapes, or also referred to as angular shapes. If all of the shapes had this triangular or angular character to them, then the drawing would be unified, and there would be a dominance of triangular or angular shapes. And because of that dominance, there is unity. Unity can only be achieved through dominance. And this is something that you learned about in my videos on design and composition, if you have watched them, if you've taken my course. But I can't go into that here because I can't show you everything in one video. You need to take an entire course to really learn everything that you need to know. You can't learn everything you need to know from a few short videos. That's impossible. I'm going to quickly change this drawing here so that it has unity of shapes. And the shape that I'm going to add is the triangular shape or angular shape. And all I need to do is make some quick changes to the shapes that are here. Like this, for example. Notice the triangular or angular shapes that are being added throughout this drawing. Now this is very rough. I'm going to show you a more refined version in a moment. Even the eyebrows have these angles, and I'm exaggerating the angles here, making them very obvious so that you can easily see them. And you can see here that all of the shapes now have this angular or triangular character to them, thereby unifying all of the shapes because they all have the same basic character. I'll show you the refined version of this drawing that I made. Here it is. And you can see this angular character of shapes, and where there are lines, there are broken lines. These are called broken lines. When a line has an angle like that, and you see a triangular shape here, 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 they're all over. Even where the beard is, on the face here. So these triangular shapes are to be found everywhere. And because of that, there is a unity of shapes. The entire painting holds together through these shapes. And because of that, this painting has a dominance of one particular kind of shape, which is the triangular or angular shape. And because of that, there is a unity of shapes. The whole painting holds together through this similarity of shapes. Now let me bring back what this drawing looked like before I added this unity of shapes. And there it is. If you compare this beginner's drawing with this painting, I think you can see that this one holds together. there's a cohesion here that is lacking in this drawing. Here, you don't get that sense of unity of shapes that you get from this painting. Compare the two. Which one appears more unified to you? This one or this one? These kind of pointed shapes, they express an evil man or an evil character. Because pointed shapes are dangerous. You could get hurt by these points. So therefore, pointed shapes or angular or triangular shapes are associated with evil characters, evil people or monsters, while circular shapes, such as this basic circle here, they are associated with friendly characters, cute and harmless characters. Also, shapes that are more curving are associated with sensuality. The brush that I have now enables me to make these pointed shapes easily, or rectangular or squared shapes like this. But since I'm going to change the character of these lines and shapes to more curved shapes, I'm going to change my brush to a round brush like you see here, which will enable me to more easily create these more rounded or curving shapes. So I'm going to come in here and change these angular shapes to more curved shapes. With these curved shapes, this character will no longer appear as threatening or evil. He'll appear more friendly looking. So I'm curving everything, and I'm doing it very quickly, as you can see. So I'm not trying to paint the pretty picture here, just trying to get this information across to you quickly. So everything becomes curved. Even his eyebrows here should be more curved, and his beard becomes more curved. This part of his clothing becomes more curved. And I think you can see that you get a different feeling now from this character. He no longer looks as evil or as threatening as he did before. So now there is this unity of curving shapes throughout. The beard right here needs to be rounded a bit more. Was a little too pointed looking. That's better. Now I'm going to bring back the angular character of shapes, and there it is. Now you can compare the two. Each painting now appears to have a unity of shapes. A unity of angular shapes and a unity of curved shapes. I'm going to turn this painting with the angular shapes into one that has these rectangular or squared looking shapes. And I'll just quickly do that. So it has more of this rectangular quality to the shapes. I changed my brush to this more square-like brush, and you can see that by using a brush like this, I'm able to get more of this blocky character of shape or rectangular character of shape. This is very rough, as you can see. It's just to let you know about these different shapes that you need to know about and apply to your drawings and paintings of the subject in order to get this unity of shape that I'm talking about. And I think you can see that this rough painting here looks different in terms of its shapes than this one. This one has a more rounded appearance, and this one has a more blocky or rectangular appearance. And each one has this unity of shapes that I'm talking about. You can see this more rectangular appearance that this figure has. I'm going to outline some of these more rectangular or block-like shapes that you see here. You can see the character of these shapes is quite different from the character of these shapes here. So throughout this figure you see this rectangular or block-like shape. Like this. And actually the whole figure should have more of that rectangular or squarish look. So therefore I would make a change right here like that. And this is rough, as I said, but you can see that there is more of this rectangular shape now, or square or block-like shape. I'm going to bring in a painting that one of the great illustrators of the 20th century did, J.C. Leyendecker. If you've never heard of this illustrator, I suggest that you get acquainted with him, because his paintings exhibit this quality of unity of shapes. And the shapes that unify this illustration here are those triangular or angular shapes that I showed you in my example. I'm going to turn this back into the one that has the triangular or angular shapes, and there it is. What I did here is what Leyendecker did here. As I pointed out to you, this painting has these angle-like shapes and broken lines like that all over the place. And if you look at this painting here, you can see the same thing. For example, right here at the edge of the face, you see, there is this kind of angle or broken line. Shapes have these points to them. If you look at this shape here like that, or this one here, they're more pointed, more angular throughout, or right here. It has that angular quality to it, or right here. You see this? Right there at the temple, and here at the edge of the hat. Has that broken line quality to it, like this. On the woman, you can see it right here. Here. See the points? Or right there. You see that broken line? Right here. In the hair as well. Right here. Right there. And right here where the fold is. Back up here where the hat is. Look at the contour of her hair right there. See how angled that contour is? Look at his face right here. There's this angle or broken line right there. Even the eyebrow has that broken line, and the shadow here. And right there. And where the chin is. And right here where the jaw is. Even the ear. This angled line or broken line and angular or triangular shape is found throughout this illustration, thereby unifying the entire picture. Just as I unified this subject here. There's a powerful unity here because of the repetition of these angular lines and shapes. You can see more of these pointed, angled lines and shapes right there. See that? And right here, and here, here. They're all over the place. They're found throughout the painting. Study the painting carefully, and you'll see those angled lines and shapes that I've been pointing out to you. They give a total impression of unity of shapes to the illustration, just as there is a total impression of unity of shapes here. That's what you need to achieve, that total impression of unity. Even the way he applies the paint here in the background has this angle-like appearance to it. The brushstrokes, the way he applies those brushstrokes are angle-like. J.C. Leidendecker. J.C. stands for Joseph Christian. He was born in 1874 and died in 1951 and was one of the preeminent American illustrators of the early 20th century. He is best known for his poster, book, and advertising illustrations, and well worth studying. Between 1896 and 1950, Leidendecker painted more than 400 magazine covers. 322 covers were painted for the Saturday Evening Post magazine, for which the great Norman Rockwell also painted covers. Here's another one of his great illustrations, and just as with the previous one, he uses that broken line and that angled or triangular shape that comes to a point like you see here. Take a look at the edge or contour of the hat right there, and you see that broken line or broken contour line like this going all around the hat. In some cases it may be a little more subtle, in other cases it's a bit more obvious. Right here where the bandana is, that bandana has that kind of angled shape to it, you see, like this. Even in the face where the eyebrows are, the cheekbone, and right there at the jaw, even the ear has that angle to it. All over. Here at the chin, there's that broken line like that. Where the vest is, see how it comes to a point? It's an angled line or contour. Even here where the folds are, the folds also make this kind of broken line or pointed shape. They're all over. Here as well. And here, here, here. They're found everywhere. So you see, the same idea that Leidendecker uses to unify his shapes, I used to unify my shapes in this rough painting. And if you understand this and are able to apply this idea of unifying shapes, you're going to see your paintings become powerfully unified. I'm hoping that with what I've shown you here, you understand the importance of unifying your shapes in your drawings and paintings in order for them to have this cohesion, this quality of appearing to hold together and give a total impression of oneness, of unity. Unity is oneness. An appearance of one kind of shape throughout the painting. A oneness of angular shapes, or a oneness of rectangular or square-like shapes, or a oneness of curving shapes. One kind of shape dominates throughout the painting. There again, unity is achieved through dominance, as I mentioned before in this video. So, if you want to learn more about dominance, then check out my videos in my course. These kind of shapes, as I've pointed out to you, the circle, square, and triangle, don't just apply to painting figures like this. You need to think of these shapes as being applied to any kind of subject. It doesn't matter what the subject is, a landscape, a seascape, a figure, portrait, still life. So, for example, just really quick here, I'll sketch in these mountains here. And notice that everything has this angular or triangular shape to it. And even buildings back here that I want to indicate. This is just really quick, as you can see. But you can see this same kind of shape being repeated everywhere. So it applies to a landscape. And then adding some shapes in the foreground here to these mountains, which are also angular. Everything is. So take a look at this little diagram that I'm drawing right here. And you can see that I'm creating a bunch of triangles like this. And now I'm going to add a circle, and the circle has this black value to it. And your eye goes immediately to that black circle. Not only because it has this strong dark value in contrast with the white value surrounding it, but also because there is this circle shape in contrast with the triangle shapes. So in this little rough sketch here, I can draw the eye to the center of interest if I add a contrasting shape, a strong contrasting shape, like a circle, for example. And then I can draw even more attention to this circle by reinforcing it with a darker value like that. And now the eye of the viewer is going to be attracted right here. In spite of all these other shapes being similar, the eye will go here because of the strong shape contrast and value contrast. And then I could add some more dark values here, like this. Spot some of them around to add interest. When you spot values like this, dark accents, and I think I'll continue that dark tone over these structures right there, like that. Now this becomes the center of interest, the most important part of the picture, and I draw the eye here, as I said, not only because of the strong value contrast, but because there is a contrasting shape here, a shape that is different from all of these other triangular or angular shapes. And I can do the same thing here. If I have all the same kind of shapes, and I want to give some relief to the painting or drawing, and draw the eye to a particular focal point, all I have to do is add a contrasting shape, or also a strong value contrast. So for this painting here, to give some relief to all of these angular shapes, I could add a circle shape, maybe right there, and that could be some kind of necklace maybe that he's wearing, just to give you an idea of the fact that you can introduce contrasting shapes into this sea of shapes that are all very similar. And this contrasting shape also helps to add strength to all of the other shapes through this contrast. Now the circle right here is a bit too obvious, and circles make for strong bullseyes, too strong. The eye is drawn too much to this circle, so it's a good idea to break up the circle a bit, like I'm doing now, so that it doesn't look too obvious. So maybe something like this. Even though I've modified that circle somewhat, it's still a curving shape that contrasts with the more straight line angular shapes. So it's still a strong contrasting shape. Now, it's not a good idea to have just one contrasting shape like this. The contrasting shape needs to relate to another shape that is the same or very similar. Otherwise, that shape appears isolated. And nothing in a good painting should appear isolated. So therefore, it needs another similar shape that it can relate to. And I think I'm going to add an oval shape right there to which this necklace is attached. However, you need to keep that repetition of a similar shape to a minimum so that this contrasting shape doesn't outnumber the dominant shape. If you add too many of these contrasting shapes, then you lose the dominance of shape, and thereby you lose the unity of shapes. So adding one or two of these contrasting shapes to the one that already exists is a good rule to follow. And I think I'm going to add another one on the other side here, like this. Just half of an oval that you see right there. And I think you can see that adding these contrasting shapes adds even more interest now to this painting. Gives it a greater feeling of vitality through this contrast of shapes. Even though I've added these opposing or contrasting shapes, the painting still looks like it has a dominance of these angular shapes, and that's because I kept the contrasting shapes to a minimum. Didn't add a lot of them, only a few, just 3 of them. And many times all you need to do is just add one additional contrasting shape to the one that already exists, so that that shape has another similar shape to relate to. And because it no longer exists alone, but has another shape to relate to, it therefore no longer is an isolated shape within the painting. And coming over here to this rough sketch, I need to repeat a similar shape like this circle here somewhere else. And let's say right here. There's another circle right there. That's all it takes. So now this circle here no longer exists in isolation because it has another circle shape to relate to. Here I'm talking strictly about shape. But it's not just shape that must not appear isolated within the composition, but all of the other elements of design as well, such as value. So right now, this value here, this dark value, it makes one shape like this, one dark mass, and this is the only place where that kind of dark shape appears. So therefore, just like with the shape, the value here is isolated. So I need to repeat that value somewhere else. And it could be right over here, this building right there. And that's all it takes. To just have one additional dark value like that somewhere else within the painting, so that this dark shape here has another dark shape to relate to, and therefore this shape doesn't exist in isolation, just as with shape that I showed you. Notice also that there is a small amount of these dark value shapes, just as there is a small amount of these circular shapes here in this painting. I didn't come in here and add a lot of darks like this all over the place. If I did that, then I would have destroyed the unity established by all of this white value. So the opposing value needs to occupy a smaller area. That is, a smaller amount should be used, so that the dominant value isn't lost. Here the dominant value is the white value. Same thing happens with color. Let's say I have a red, and that red appears right here. If I leave the red only in this spot, and I don't add a red anywhere else, then that red becomes isolated within the painting, because it doesn't have another red or a similar color to relate to. But if I add a similar color, it doesn't have to be the same, it can be a variation of red, such as pink or red violet. It needs to have some red in it, in other words. Then this red now has another similar color to relate to, and therefore this red no longer exists in isolation. It's not an isolated color within the painting. And always make your color shapes different in size. Those sizes were a little too similar, so I'm enlarging this red shape here to get more variety and thereby more interest into the picture. Also, if you have just one color like this, it adds a very strong accent, and it rivets the eye here too much. It creates a very strong bull's eye that is very difficult for the eye of the viewer to pull away from. But if I add another similar color here, like this, then the eye is a bit more distracted from this color here, and therefore that color doesn't set up a too dominant looking bullseye. So the eye can travel to another part of the picture, which is here, to this other red color. But sometimes the artist breaks the rule and just has one accent color like this, and it doesn't appear anywhere else, because the artist wants that kind of strong, powerful bullseye effect. He or she wants the eye of the viewer to be riveted to a particular spot like this. In this video, you've learned many important things about shapes and the need for applying what you've learned here to your own work in order to improve it. There are many more things to learn about shapes and many other things that you need to know about if you want to produce really great work, and you can learn those things from my complete illustration art course. So if you're interested in learning more, then check out my complete illustration art course at www.onlineartacademy. Thank you for watching, and so long.